There, we started. Hello and most welcome to 1636. And we will today look at the Apocalyptic number 616 and the Donatist Church by Jesse Hoover at Baylor University. And we are currently at page 721. Just a question, maybe we can get rid of this. What will happen if you click here, for instance? Could you take this part away? Up here in the corner. What do you see where my marker is? It's next to yours here. I don't know if that's one of these, maybe. Okay. We'll try that next time then. Oh, you don't see my screen. Up, up, up. If you go up with your pointer up, even further up. Can you go any up, more up? Yeah. You go to the right, right. More to the right. Go up one step. Up. Go up. You go up that direction. Yes, that one. If you click that one, what happens? Click it. I'll go back. Click it again. It didn't work. Well, I'll check it out next time. Thank you very much, Kalle. And it's this sub chapter, a Donatist exegetical trajectory we are at. A bit further down. This would be a continuation of 1633. And we've been discussing earlier on here how, in a quantum mechanical way, the interpreters are deciding what reality becomes by their needs, their wants, and very important, the random choice, which is the scientific choice. This is in stark contrast to the Newtonian, strictly, so to speak, out there picture, where what we do or what we think do not matter at all. We could also call this an involvement in reality. We are being creators of reality, which makes it real. The old classical model of an origin out there is just sheer subjectivity, oddly enough. By not choosing or deciding, you let in subjectivity in not a very pleasant way. Human Kings 154. 4 times that and we get 616. I continue a Donatist exegetical trajectory. A plausible third witness may therefore be added to the number of Donatist texts which show evidence of utilizing the 616 tradition. None of these witnesses appear to be directly dependent on the others. Tychonius' Christogram is unparalleled among known Donatists' texts, while the Liber genealogies does share a common calculative strategy with Daniel chapter 15. Their casts of characters differ dramatically. To be sure, this preference for the number 616 probably did not function as a self-imposed identity marker. The Donatist editor of the Florence edition of the Liber Genealogus at least clearly preferred the 6-6 tradition of Victorinus to the 616-based calculations of his predecessors. We'll make the text maybe a little bit bigger. I will try. Yeah. Nevertheless, the presence of these 3 apparently independent witnesses to the variant number within the Donatist communion, which together account for all future allusions among Catholic writers, strongly suggest that the Latin text of Revelation 1318 in common use among the dissident church differed from the versions read by other Latin-speaking communities in late antiquity. To say more requires diving into rather murky waters, because citations of the apocalyptic number are very rare among Latin writers prior to the late 4th century. It is uncertain when the 616 variant first entered the Latin tradition. It is not found in any known recension of the Old Latin text of Revelation 13:18. Though it is true that the earliest text types associated with the Old Latin textual tradition either do not preserve the verse or show evidence of potential contamination by Vulgate readings. A Latin translation of Irenaeus against heresies, which would have included his opposition to the offending number 616, was probably available by the early 200s. But this is hardly evidence for an independent Latin adherence to the variant number. These uncertainties are compounded when turning to the Latin exegetical tradition. There are only two witnesses to the apocalyptic number prior to Tychonius. Victorinus of Poetuvium's commentary in Apocalyptic 13.3, which probably dates to the 260s, and Gregory of Elvira's Tractatus de Epiphalamio, 1814 and 17. Which was composed in the early 370s. Both of these texts contain the reading 666, though it is interesting to note that neither writer necessarily reflects the Old Latin textual tradition. Victorinus, who according to Jerome spoke better Greek than Latin, appears to have independently translated the book of Revelation from Greek. While Gregory shows signs elsewhere of having been influenced by Victorinus and may simply be following his predecessor's lead. Almost nothing is known for certain, therefore, about the origin or prominence of the variant reading 616 in the Latin tradition prior to its use within the Donatist communion, nor as has been demonstrated does it appear in any known Old Latin manuscript. Unless the Donatist preference for the number was based on folk tradition rather than textual exegesis. Therefore, it is likely that the Old Latin recension of Revelation in common use within the dissident church was either unique to that Donatist communion or simply not very widespread outside it. Unfortunately, the most complete witness to the text of Revelation within the Donatist communion is also most idiosyncratic. The Old Latin recension used by Tychonius in the Expositio Apocalypseos is very different from other known Donatist citations of Revelation, including those found in Tychonius's own prior work, the Liber Regularum. Instead, Tychonius appears to have used a recension known as text type S, which, though uncommon, is also attested in other texts dating from the 4th century and beyond. It is worth noting, however, that text type S probably did not include the 616 variant, which means that Tychonius is likely reverting back to an earlier recension when he includes it in his citation of Revelation 13:18. Other Donatist citations are fragmentary but suggestive. An analysis of their contents reveals a text that tends toward the older text type C and K, albeit with multiple idiosyncrasies. Some of these, no doubt, are easily explained by memory lapses or Three quotations, such as Tychonius's unparalleled edition of Et Argento, silver, in the list of the whore of Babylon's accoutrements. In Liber Regularum 714, or the Apician martyrs, extremely free adaptation of Revelation 6, 9 to 11 in the Acta Saturni. Other differences, however, seem to reflect a genuinely divergent textual tradition. In addition to preserving the alternate number 616, for instance, the Liber Genealogus also records the opening lines of Revelation 13:18 as hic sapientia vertitur. Here wisdom is overthrown, rather than the far more common hic est sapientia. Here is wisdom. This variant is extremely rare, attested elsewhere only in the writings of the 5th century Iberian presbyter Eutropius and the 9th century Archbishop Agobard of Lyon. Similarly, the Donatist polemicist Fulgentius preserves a reading of Revelation 17:15 that is noticeably different from most other textual traditions. The passage as preserved in Contra Fulgentium 12 reads, "Et dixit mihi angelus." Aquas quas vidisti. Superquas sedet fornicaria illa. Populi turbe et nationes sunt. And the angel said to me, the waters which you saw, above which that fornicatress sits, are people, crowds, and nations. In this short quotation, the word angelos is paralleled only by Caesarius of Arles, nationes by Beatus Chromatius, and Augustinian sermon entitled De Genesi in Vigilia Pascae, while Fornicaria appears to be unique to Fulgentius. Of course, the fragmentary nature of such citations and the lack of overlap between them makes it difficult to tell whether Donatist exegetes were appealing to the same recension of the text. Nevertheless, the recension or recensions used tend to be archaic in character and sometimes preserve variant readings almost unique in the Latin tradition. This strengthens the case that the allusions to the variant number 616 by three different Donatist exegetes probably reflect a reading found in the Latin text of Revelation in common use within the dissident communion. The objectives of this article were threefold: to collate all currently known references to the 616 reading in the Latin tradition and demonstrate their ultimate dependence on Donatist sources. To introduce a new witness to that reading from a Donatist Capitula series. And to suggest that the text of Revelation prevalent among Donatist congregations unlike those in use among other Latin-speaking Christian communities, likely included the variant number Given these findings, it is reasonable to expect that any new witness to the number 616 that may be discovered within the Latin exegetical tradition will either be dependent directly or indirectly on a Donatist source. Praeconius's expositio apocalypseos being the most likely culprit, or will potentially be Donatist texts themselves. A promising locus for the latter option is the mass of anonymous theological texts deriving from North Africa. Sermons, polemical treatises, exegetical guides, which are constantly being identified, many of which remain accessible only in manuscript form. Several of these texts have already been identified as Donatist in origin, including a corpus of 60 catechetical sermons and a preaching handbook. Finding the 616 variant in these texts, and in particular the 154 times 4 geometric strategy, already noticed in the two anonymous Donatist writings above, should be considered potential markers of Donatist origin, similar to the occurrence of the charged word traditor. The substantial Donatist contribution to biblical scholarship in the late antique and early medieval eras has only recently been noticed. In highlighting the dissident churches' apparently unique preservation of the alternate number of the beast in Revelation 13:18. Yet another example of its exegetical vibrancy has been brought to light. That's the end of the text. Go to some quotes now. (722). Short note about 10 lines down, well, maybe, or show evidence of potential contamination by Vulgate readings. There you have it. You had it up one line. You just missed up one line. Or show evidence of potential contamination by Vulgate reading. And we have the contamination idea. Things can be contaminated, not as objective anymore or truthful. In the same paragraph, bit to the end of that one, and at the very end, while Gregory shows signs elsewhere of having been influenced by Victorinus and may simply be following his predecessor's lead, not being truly objective in the classical sense. Accusations are spread. A text that's contaminated or whose writers are following someone else, not to be trusted. It is affecting the true original. And then we have another one, next page, 723. Unfortunately, second sentence, unfortunately, the most complete witness to the text of Revelation within the Donatist communion is also its most idiosyncratic. So we have contaminated, we have following a lead, and we also have idiosyncratic. And it continues further down. Other Donatist citations of Revelation are fragmentary. Another thing. An analysis of the contents reveal a text that tends toward all the text type C and K, albeit with multiple idiosyncrasies. So it's fragmentary is not good either. There are not enough information, so to speak, and once more it's a mentioning of idiosyncrasies, many crimes of the corrupter of original. And here is even an example, such as Tychonius' unparalleled edition of it argento and silver. An addition. Then we have the Abyssinian martyrs just below, martyrs extremely free adaptation. Free adaptation. Of Revelation 6, 9 to 11, the Acta Saturni. Now many crimes are piling up here, and it continues on the very next page. Other differences, however, seem to reflect a genuinely divergent textual tradition. It is doomed as being divergent. Genuinely divergent textual tradition. In addition to preserving alternate number 616, for instance, there is a change of words. Hic sapientia vertitur instead of the hic est sapientia. And here we have how common something is, commonness or generality. Hic est sapientia is much more common than hic sapientia latitude. At the bottom of this page, 724, we have the accusation is full. The objectives of this article were threefold: collate all currently known reference to 616 reading in the Latin tradition and demonstrate that ultimate dependence upon Donatist sources. In the beginning of the last paragraph. And at the very end, it's another mentioning of Tychonius. Tychonius expositio apocalypseus, being the most likely culprit, or will potentially be Donatist texts themselves. So what I managed to gather at the very end here is contamination of the original, following lead, the second one. We have idiosyncratic, third one. Fourth one is fragmentary. Fifth is divergent. Six, addition. Somebody added it argentum. Pre-adaption, also bad. And 8 is more of what should not be idiosyncratic. It should be common, should be general. So we have 8 traits how to preserve the original. Following these lines, you will enter into the Logos, the absolute presence of now and here, the true innerness of what causes everything. It is fairly well established Aristotelian Hegelian take. And I pointed earlier, we know in science, randomness equals create objectivity. This pointing out here might loosen up the accusations against the Donatist writings, so to speak. Accusations might be exaggerated, but and we should see these traits as scientific. Contamination is always happening. It's necessary. As I said last, random and voluntary and fitting the picture, all are absolutely necessary for truthfulness. And fragmentary, we know from fractality. It's a necessity to understand the world. It cannot be understood if you, so to speak, try to gather everything in the classical way, gathering all information bits in the whole world, or trying to learn the National Encyclopedia in Swedish by heart to get all information bits in the world. I just, yeah. And idiosyncratic, it's a bad thing as well. It's not in science. It's not when we go to reality looking or truthfulness. It's a necessity to have it idiosyncratic. All general takes are classical or impossible. Each quantum experiment is idiosyncratic and 100% unique. We in science, we do not go from singular instances to generalities or universals. That's a Greek Aristotelian take that has been abandoned. And generalities, how could that be preserving the truth? People used to believe in ether. Everyone believed in ether. There was no exception. Doesn't mean it's true. Or the opposite doesn't mean it's true. Pre-adaption. We know that capturing the zest of a text always means changing it. Needs to be changed if you want to have what it really means. Copying it blindly is mechanistic. As the only having the father figure, as we talked about in lecture 1634 and A and B. We need father and mother. We need rigor and contingency. Both are needed. If we follow on the father, we will get a mechanistic, unliving world without truth, meaning, and as we mentioned in 1634, this is also what makes movement. So the word of God, for instance, can be transferred. Here it stops. It becomes that static, stone-inscribed reality. You take a chisel and you carve it in stone and it can never change and therefore not mean anything anymore to anyone. He was absolutely right to be a bit provoking in adding ad agentum. That made the text true. Additions make for truthfulness and objectivity. Then can also be shared. And Donatist sources doesn't need to be. This is not really pointed out in the text, but it's almost hinted that being Donatist could be something suspicious because it makes it idiosyncratic. It's only coming from that source. And on top of that, that source is heretical, possibly. You need also to forget the original. You can say that. Talked earlier about forgetting. That is a necessity for a lively text. Instead of slavishly writing everything, thinking that now I preserve the exactness. Well, words are polysemic. Meanings cannot be captured or sort of prisoned like that. You as a copyist or interpreter cannot slavishly follow, because that would make it subjective. That would make it non-acceptable. It would, for every copy, it will lack Because all words have multiple meanings, millions of them. That's, I would say, is a necessity for meaning to come to the fore. The polysemia words, it's an absolute necessity for the transferal of these important gospels, messages, higher truths, pointing to spirituality. The Aristotelian Newtonian worldview has run havoc with the texts, made them less, made them possibly not as telling, and no one is listening anymore. Nobody's actively doing listening. This ability to listen needs to come again. To listen to the messages of past, of present, of God, of wisdom. We need to get back to reality. What's my summary of the text? Dear colleague, maybe some comments from you.
Please allow me to repeat this. I read this text some 2 weeks ago, but it's so important. It's worth repeating. Lectio difficile potior. Latin for the more difficult reading is stronger. Is a main principle of textual criticism, where different manuscripts conflict on a part of reading. The principle suggests that the more unusual one is the more likely the original. The presupposition is that scribes would more often replace odd words and hard sayings with more familiar and less controversial ones than vice versa. Lectio divisio potior is an internal criterion, etc., etc. So this is
Indeed, very good, yeah.
Mm.
Indeed,
But,
very good, yes.
but whenever it suits scholars, they skip this criterion. For instance, this HOOVER, he skips it here, for instance. I could read it. In addition to preserving the alternate number 16 and 16, for instance, the Liber Genealogus also records the opening lines of Revelation 13:18 as hic sapientia vertitur, here wisdom is overthrown, rather than for common hic sapientia, here is wisdom. This variant is extremely rare. So here, common is a virtue, as you saw, as you said, Hans. But it goes against this. So all these criteria, all these principles, they're only based on common sense by scholars. Instead of relying on, let's say, quantum physics, the real science.
Yes, indeed. This is the fanatic trial of getting away with the subject. So if someone says, I subjectively want to write this, so to speak, that is bad. An addition, a change of words, that would sort of be something condemnable. But it's not in science, it's not in reality. It's only in the Aristotelian tradition.
You didn't hear me, but I laughed here as you did, but I laughed louder when I read this. Likely culprits.
Yeah, definitely.
So Tychonus is the culprit for the 6 and 16. But HOOVER contradicts himself actually, more or less, I would say. Okay, so if you compare this, so HOOVER says that 6 and 16 depends on Tychonus. He was, so to say, the inventor, the culprit of this variant number.
Yes.
But if you go back to, let me find the word quickly here. on the word imposed. Here, this was on page.
Oh, yeah.
Let me see the page. This so I don't. 721. 721. So this is contradiction by HOOVER himself. To be sure, this preference for the number 616 probably did not function as a self-imposed identity marker. So on the one hand, let me see. It's uncertain when the 16th very first entered into the Latin tradition. So he's contradicting himself as far as I understand HOOVER.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
apologize to HOOVER if I misunderstand him. So on one hand, he says that it was not an identity marker. It was not a. Okay, we Heterontis we built in 616. That was not the identified marker. But on the other hand, the culprit of among Heterontis who have invented
The culprit.
these Tychonius.
That's yes, indeed. I got the feeling I found these 9 traits. You can find these 9 traits, or there are up to 14. Somebody listed that in all Aristotelian Hegelian texts, and it's fanatical. It draws a picture that there are people out there now and in history that try to obscure the originals, and they change, and they're doing evil stuff by adding ad argentum, and these are the true enemies. And oddly enough, is exactly the same argument that all critics of religion has. It's very obvious. You criticize religion is because it's made up. It is the theorems of religion are not common. They are idiosyncratic. They are subjective. They're coming from human beings. It's the same accusations. So, and I never heard any criticizer of religion or an atheist apostate not using these things. It's strictly with the Aristotelian tradition, and it goes against the core of physics today and what we know about fractality, also mathematics.
Absolutely. And then I was asking myself, you said that contamination is necessary in science.
Oh, yeah.
So I can try to answer that myself. Contamination is necessary because, or you cannot avoid it because all to so to say measure an observation or experiment, you need an observer.
Yeah.
And the observer is the very one who contaminates it.
Yes, yes. The old idea was that it should be uncontaminated. And that doesn't make a truthful physical statement, because then you isolate something from the rest of the world. And that is proven wrong. That is actually proven wrong. Remember that video clip we looked at, then English well-known figure criticized the Bible and other scriptures, is that we were to redo history the last 2,000 years, it wouldn't be the same, whereas science would be the same. So he was incredibly Aristotelian. Sameness spelled truth somehow, and for it to be different, it would be contaminated by human hand.
Absolutely.
So this is thanks to Derrida, who helped me open my eyes to these tendencies, which are very, very covered down beneath everything, these tendencies, and they capture us and we believe in them, and they become our driving force, so to speak.
Let me add one last thing. The paper that we went through last week. It was by Kosser.
Yes, Köster.
Let me repeat one thing from there because I think it's useful. So the paper by Kosser from 2016, you saw there, he quoted Irenaeus from the 2nd century. For Irenaeus, 666 was the more difficult reading.
Yeah.
And here instead for HOOVER. So Kosser follows this principle of lectio difficile potior, while HOOVER discards it because it's found among heretics.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of contradictions. So as far as follow this principle, when it suits them and when it doesn't suit them, they return to so-called common sense reasoning, which doesn't hold anything for. Okay, let me thank you if you want to say something concluding, that's fine.
Well, I was pretty amazed. I think it's 15 traits of Aristotelian fanaticism, if you want. And I found 8 ones in the text, and I think very few people know of these tendencies, this movement outside Derrida, Heidegger, Wittgenstein. So therefore, I think it's extremely important to bring this up. In the case of biology, as the Derrida text, very few people are aware of the Aristotelian Hegelian influence, but also in text criticism, it's unknown factor, and it's also coming from science, so it needs to be pointed out. And in the end, all things looks the same if they're following more than, I would say, 8 of or 7 of these: contamination, idiosyncratic, and so forth. So they all look the same and are not able to carry any truthfulness or any objectivity or any value. Let me end with a quote from Paul Feyerabend: "Those people are not even wrong. They lack the power to be wrong." And we know all scientific truths has the potentiality to be wrong. But this cannot even be wrong. It doesn't even have that. It is just a repetition of pre-made laws, and it becomes very fixed. So we only have the father, not the mother. I think that sums it up pretty well. Thank you very much for participating, and have a beautiful day.